Sundown Bay, all here right off the ICW. Whole back shoreline, man, we've had a big influx of water that's come into our system, which is great because we got the full moon in play. Uh, we will start sliding away from that full moon here in the next day or so. And we'll get on the back side of that, so you still have great opportunity to fish those minor setting and minor rising. But with the extra water that we've had in here, we've got extra high tides, which have been really good. Some people like it, some people don't. Me personally, I like the higher water here because it opens up lots more fishing area that we've been able to get into. Yes, will it scatter some fish? Absolutely, it's going to scatter some fish. They got more opportunity to swim around and get places that they haven't been. But that also gives you opportunity to fish areas that maybe you haven't been able to get to in maybe a few days or weeks or months, whatever the case may be. And you find basically almost like a new fishing area, so to speak, but it's really not. So it's just an area that you've been able to get back to now that we've had enough water. So lots of these back lakes become into play because you're able to access them now, which is great because those fish really like to push back in there, specifically redfish. You can find some quality trout that'll be up here on these outer edges like this, up and down that grass line. The grass lines really become really important during these time frames when we have this kind of water levels that come into us like this, because you don't know how long it's going to last, how much it's going to fluctuate. Is it going to be for 4 or 5 days? Is it going to be for a week? Typically, with the big moon that's in place and moving, it's really going to push and pull a lot of water in and out here when that moon's moving all over the place for us, setting and rising and being over top and underneath. So just a great thing to be able to fish in and around that when you have that type of water levels. But these whole shorelines here, we've got the shallower grass beds in here since that extra water's in here, because you can get right up on the shoreline right now and still be, thigh deep, maybe even waist deep, depending on the type of shoreline that you're fishing. Here in Sundown, you've got a lot of that type of opportunity. You can work those edges. You can put probably 2 or 3 guys spread out there, but you won't be able to get too terribly far off there when that water is up like that. It gets can be uncomfortably deep for you if you're 50, 60 yards off the shoreline. So we've been primarily just kind of focusing like right on the grass line edge, maybe 10 or 15 yards off the grass line edge, and maybe stagger your party if you've got more than 2 people. That way you can get 50, 60 yards apart, and you'll have opportunities that come about. Lots of bait working up and down these shorelines like this. You get these little back lake areas. You can drift off into those. You can pole off into those. You can put your trolling motor down, get up into some of these areas, and you may be able to sight cast some of these redfish, even possibly a trout. The other thing too, we've had some flounder that will lay up on these edges here as they'll begin to, as we're now into October, we will start to see some of that flounder start to run a little bit, and they'll start moving and shaking and baking and start to hit these passes and these edges. Just remember, November 1, our flounder season shuts down for a month and a half, so if you like to target those, you got 31 days here to do the best that you can to try to locate and find you some flounder. They're there, as you get closer to some of these passes and stuff. Those will give you your opportunities. You're starting to see bigger schools of redfish that are starting to show up as they're starting to move and getting ready to make their run out to the Gulf as well. Some black drum that are scattered in and around those. Trout's been pretty good for the most part. Like I say, our main focus and target's been in and around the minors, that moonrise and the moon set. And that's when we've had our best production. Now, we've had some good middays as well in around that major over. And we've been able to maximize and be productive during that time frame. Although the bat frame that's been in that major over during the middle of the day, whether it be around from 11-ish to 2, depending on what day that you're fishing, maybe a little bit later, that bat frame's been pretty short. We've been able to maximize it, and it looks to be like it showed up or happened just a little bit early into the bite frame. So something to take in mind to see if that pattern holds for you if you're fishing that time frame. But it has been a short window, maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, depending on the day, that we've been able to maximize catching opportunities during that time. But like I say, the main thing we've been working on and really focusing has been the minors rise and minor set, and that's really for a full moon wise. That's your best opportunities when you're throwing artificial. Main thing that we've been throwing, top water baits right up against the shoreline. It's been very productive for us. We're getting opportunities with those. Work those for as long as you so choose. If you're a top water junkie and you just want to keep chunking it, keep chunking it. You'll get an opportunity or two along the way. It'll happen. Down south, Twisted Tea has been good for us. In the wide ice, Bone Diamond, both of those have lit up in both the original and the size shad. We have been throwing that in and around that full moon, just a smaller profile bait, which is always good practice to be able to do when you do that. Mirrodines, soft dines have been good. Double Ds have been good. There's been just a bunch of these different baits. It's been very productive. It's not been any one particular one that's been just dynamite, knock it out of the park. If there would be one, it would probably be the Burner Shad Mud Minnow. Has been very, very good for us. Been very productive, and we've caught some really good quality fish, both in redfish and trout. And every once in a while, since it's that smaller bait, you can bounce it off that bottom and catch you a flounder, depending on where you're at. Knocking tails, if their water clarity has been pretty good, the heavy metal's been good for us. Greenbacks and Rogue, those three flavors have been outstanding. Of course, watermelon red's been good as well, and so that's another flavor that you can kind of add into that if you want to. The white ice and the knocking tail's been good, so you get just a little bit extra with the knot in that tail, with the rattle chamber that's in the tail of that particular bait. So it's very effective. Even when things get a little slow, you can chunk that and you can get reactionary strikes from it. But that's been our main focus and what we've been really working on, especially up here in Sundown. Lots of great shoreline there on both sides. You can creep up into some of the mouths that go back further into these lakes. Just be aware some of those areas gets a little bit softer than others. So if you haven't waded that before, just be aware of that so you don't get yourself in a little bit of a predicament there. If you don't want to do that, like I say, you can just get on your trolling motor and you kind of work your way back in there, especially with the amount of water that we do have in place. Here from Blind Pass, again, that's the end of Super Flats that goes back up this way toward Lydian, but I really like to focus in and around here on this point down here as you get through Blind Pass, the little flats that are back off over here on the back side of Mud. You've got a big, nice, long bar that goes on this whole backside. You've got 2 or 3 cut-throughs that go through there, so you got to allow some current that flows through those particular areas. So you can really get yourself some opportunity. You got some bowls, little deeper bowls. So again, if that water really drops out, then you get yourself an opportunity to have a little bit deeper water to access to it. But right now, that's not the case. Like I said in this last video, we'll just see how long this water stays up for us. It's really high right now, which is great. There's great opportunities. So when you get back here on the backside, if you fish this area very much, you know that there's back lakes. They're all back here on the backside of Mud. Some of them you can access by boat pretty easy. If you got a poling skiff, those guys are back there a lot. And if you got a smaller or a little bit maybe lightweight skiff, you can get back in there. I like to park on the outside, anchor up, and walk across into some of these areas and get into some of these back lakes and just work them. Primarily what I like to throw back in those back lakes is topwater baits, because you can get some spectacular blow-ups that are back in these particular areas. And you can really work it, especially if the fish are hanging in there. The other thing you have to kind of be aware of, if you're working back in these areas, you got a lot of floating grass. So sometimes that kind of messes you up with throwing your topwater bait, but you can switch to single hooks, and it's not as invasive like that as far as your grass getting caught up on your hooks. But if you don't mind just taking some grass off every so often on a cast, chunk it with your regular hooks and get after it and have some fun back there. You'll have some opportunities that will pop up. Bait's not been an issue, man. There's bait been everywhere. So your food source is in place, great structure that's back in these areas here. And again, with the amount of wind or water that we have, wind's not a factor for you back in some of these areas because they're protected. So depending on what wind we've got, that will be something to consider if you can get out to here and work all this. You can get on the outer edge of this thing and work the bar, work that gut, throwing your plastics in there. Again, you're down south, and we're still throwing 16th. I'm going to throw 16th, especially this time of year moving forward. The rest until we get back into May and June, man, I'm going to throw nothing but 16th ounce jig heads. Again, we want a slower descent, fall down into these water columns like that, and really be able to work those water columns. We're fixing to start having these fronts start line up on us. We've got one coming later in this week. We'll see how significant it is for us, if it's just gonna bring rain or not any rain, if it's gonna be a wind event, or maybe if it's gonna drop temperatures. Says it's gonna be cooler, but we'll see. Won't know for sure until that takes place, but that's something to consider if you're able to come down later this week or into the weekend. Know that that's going to be in place, that there will be there, so that weather pattern will change somewhat, so make plans accordingly when you do this. Again, soft dines when you're working these guts like that, because say we're fixing to get into suspended time. Corky season's cranking up. It's fixing to be there. get them out, start working. If you need to change hooks on those, do so. If we have a much cooler winter this year than what we had last year, then the corky game or a suspended bait of some sort, whether it be a soft dine, double D, corkies, any of those types of things are going to be really great baits that you're going to want to throw in some of these areas where you got a little bit deeper water and you got some spectacular potholes and edges to work, guts and passes. Those are always things that you really want to work those style of baits with as we move into the cooler months. Say we're right here at the 1st of October, and we've got 31 days that are in front of us that's going to give us all different kinds of opportunities, weather-wise, catching-wise, fishing-wise. Tides are going to be doing what they're going to be due. So lots of great opportunities in front. Again, burner shad, we've been throwing those primarily for the down south. You can work the originals and the multiple different flavors that we have in those. Whenever I throw the soft dine or the soft dine XL, I pretty much just keep it pretty basic in a mullet size or flavor, should I say, like a silver body with a black back on that with the eyes. Those are very productive for me. If you have your, if you have a favorite flavor that you want to throw or a style in that, then throw it. I would strictly encourage you to do that. Of course, the Double D is one of those ascension baits, and it does a really good job. Again, in the knock and tail, the flavors I mentioned earlier, greenbacks, rogue, heavy metal, depending on what kind of clarity you got. You get over some of these grass beds and stuff, you get a lot of cleaner water, so the heavy metal shows up for you. White ice as well. Again, Big Papa Pearl, Twisted Tea, back in the down south as well, have all been good for us here in the last few weeks. So put those in your box and get ready to throw those as we crank up and get ready for our later fall and winter time. I'm sure it will be upon us before we both know it. Up in Mission Bay, the main thing that you want to always remember, whether it's this time of year, whether it's in the fall of the year, whether it's in wintertime, whether it's in summer, spring, whatever, when we have these big influxes of tide, lots of water comes into our system. What happens is lots of these back bays, lots of these back lakes that don't typically have a lot of water into them, they start getting a lot of water coming in. It starts pushing bait fish further back, and therefore your predator fish follow. So if you don't know that, always put that in your back pocket and understand that. That's why understanding the tides and how they work and where they're at on any particular time during the day. If you've got a falling tide, if you've got an incoming tide, where you're starting out on your medium, low-level waters and all that kind of stuff each day, it's extremely important. That's how I start my day, is looking at where stuff is during that time frame, because that lets me eliminate a lot of water or include a lot of water depending on what that is. So a great thing about that, with the extra water we do have in place, Mission Bay, especially the back shoreline where the river that popped, the Mission River, kicks into there. Then you got Mission Lake back there is another great area. It's a little soft back in there if you decide that you want to wade that, but sometimes at Mission Lake, it's a big enough area you can really cover. It's got plenty of shoreline in it. It's real easy to slide up in there, and you don't have to worry about anything. You can get back in certain areas of it, and you can really take your time, and you can work the shorelines. You can get in some of the grass flat areas, and you work those. One of these great areas like this, back in the lake like that, I like to throw the topwater bait back in there, just work right down the shoreline, just working that thing to see if I can, get blow-ups, see if I get opportunities of any kind back in there. And more times than not, when that does take place, we do get some opportunities in there. Maybe not as many as you may like, but, as long as I'm getting 2 or 3 blow-ups on a particular weight, or a catch here or catch there, that's successful for me personally. I like that. It doesn't take a lot for me to be happy. But seeing a blow up on a topwater is a really fun thing for it to happen and watch it take place. You can switch over and throw your, if you're not getting consistent blow ups or a swirl or a take every so often, switch over to your plastics and start working that shoreline, that edge. Just kind of look at where your water is on your body and see what you got, because there's an edge that is there. It's real subtle, but it's something that you want to be on, because fish like that kind of stuff. They want to swim up and down those edges because they're ambush predators. So therefore, they want to give their best opportunity where they can reach up and get their prey, however that is, and especially when they're trying to ambush. So that gives you a great line, if you will, to work those types of areas and get into that kind of stuff. So always keep that into mind, whether you're back here in Mission, whether you're down in Port, or whether you're over in Swan, back in Turtle Pen, Copano Creek, all those areas. When that higher tides come in, all these areas become very productive in some form or fashion. So it behooves you to go there and start working those types of areas with all these different styles and kinds of bait. But getting on the shoreline, working it with the top water bait, working it with the down south, throwing the 16th ounce and in the multiple flavors. So look and see what your water clarity is. That's one of the things about the mud minnow that's been very good for us. It's got that darker back with a lot of flake and a little bit more translucent belly to it. So if you do have just a little bit of stained water and maybe not too much that's dirty, then you can throw that. And that's, of course, the dirtier water side, we're fixing to have start probably winds that's going to come in here. I'm sure that when this front pushes in here later this week, we'll have some type of wind event pushing that front down in here. So make sure that you kind of keep yourself protected depending on how heavy those winds may be, or don't get yourself caught depending on when it comes through. Always keep an eye on that. Another thing on the safety side of that, as far as your power poles go, always keep you a conventional anchor in there. So when you know there's something like that coming, it doesn't hurt to lay that conventional anchor out, because they hold really, really well. A little bit more so than what the power poles does, and it takes a lot of pressure off that transom back there, so it's just beating into the bow. So anyway, it's just a small safety tip there, just especially as we're fixing to get into that time of the year with these different fronts that's going to start pushing for us. But working these edges with your down souths, working them with your marker 54 and the jerk shrimp, another great bait that you can just bounce that thing along on those grass edges, and pull out some trout out of there, maybe a flounder or two. Redfish get up in those things when they're looking for those shrimp like that, so that's always a great thing to have in the box for you, and it's a great option to throw in there. And then you can stay with your regular knock and tail, or you can throw your Miraloo Little Johns in multiple different flavors based on what your water clarity is. All great baits right now. It's been, like I say, the last week and a half has been very solid for us in a lot of different baits, throwing those types of things. More the darker colors, because of some of the water we have been fishing has been a little bit more stained or dirty. So that's where your chartreuse can come in for you if you like to throw that. Not a fan of it, but when you got really dirty water, heavy winds, and that chartreuse tail can help you in those particular matters as far as finding and catching fish with that. But yeah, take your time with it. Work it. Focus on your minors during that time frame. If you get an opportunity to fish a major during the middle of the day, you possibly can get it to be productive for you. And again, safety, man, we're starting to get into that time of year when things just pop up on us. So make sure y'all keep an eye on weather and the safety things on your boat. Everything's working properly.